The video you're about to watch covers what presenter John Henderson calls little-known aspects of the air arm of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This air arm has been called throughout its existence the Force's Air Division, the Air Services Directorate, or just Air Services. John Henderson, incidentally, is a longtime member of the CAHS Chapter in Ottawa and a retired RCMP commissioned officer. He made this presentation in September of 2021 to the Canadian Aviation Historical Society chapter in the spirited home of the Force, Regina, Saskatchewan. Thanks for watching.
This is actually the fourth time I've done this little talk. I did it in Toronto 14, 15 years ago, and I did it in 2007 to the Ottawa chapter. And Will and Regina and Dick Pickering in Montreal have been after me ever since to do it for you folk, and of course the ones in Montreal. I did Montreal earlier today. So my spiel is about an hour long. It's sort of entitled Lesser Known Facts of Air Division History. I have about 50 slides. But just before I get going, just a very quick and brief tribute to Paddy Gardner, one of the stalwart founding members of the Canadian Aviation Historical Society, who passed away in his sleep a couple of nights ago. He would have been 87 in October. I've only known Paddy, unlike some of you, for about 17, 18 years. Met him when I joined the Ottawa chapter. Most of you are certainly aware he was a raconteur, a draftsman, an artist, a wit, a friend, a living history type of individual, larger than life, a passionate man about his aviation. My particular bent with this particular watercolor in front of me, 2 or 3 months ago, I plucked up the nerve and said, Paddy, can I have one of your watercolors? Because I've always been drawn to his watercolors and that slightly whimsical approach that he brought to all of his artwork. And most of you are familiar with that. One of the things I learned today in an email from Alistair Reeves is that you see the Fleet Fort up in the middle of the top of the photograph. Well, apparently, Paddy had this habit in nearly every piece of artwork he ever did. He had a scantily clad Japanese schoolgirl somewhere in his drawings, somewhere in his watercolors. And as the process would work through, ultimately she would vanish and be replaced with an airplane or whatever it was that he happened to be drawing. So anyway, having asked him, he very kindly, we went back and forth a little bit, and this is the result. I like Harvard's, he likes Harvard's, and this popped into the mail about maybe a month or so ago. And sadly, of course, we've lost Paddy. But just a quick acknowledgement of the role he played in our aviation history. Okay, some of you are perhaps asked, when did your interest in aviation start? Well, I'm 69 right now, and these photographs are probably taken when I was 6 or 7. So a couple of bits of wood and a nail and your dad's hammer, and away you go. And just a quick, most of you probably saw the background when we were chin-wagging earlier on. This is where I'm sitting just now. If you can just see that table, the yellow part is the underwing from an American Texan with the traditional yellow. The engine mount is from an Avro Anson that used to belong to Spartan Aviation here in Ottawa. And that was formerly in the Paddy Gardner collection. I gave him a hand when he was clearing his house and getting ready to move up to Coojawak. And he kindly gave me the engine mount with a couple of bits of ABS plastic. It turns into a nice table base. This is the view to my slight right and the inevitable bookcase. So aviation, as you all know, can be a hazardous undertaking. This is the photograph of a lady by the name of Nancy Putkemery. And you can see she's got her pilot's wings. Well, Nancy was one of my troop mates when we went through training in 1975-76. And she ended up being stationed in Manitoba. And at some point, she decided that she wanted to be an RCMP pilot. At that time, there were many RCMP members said, I'd like to be a pilot. And the RCMP would indeed train them to be pilots. Some of them had hours already. Nancy undertook to get a lot of hours on her own. and then finished her training with the RCMP and ultimately joined Air Services. And in 1989, sadly, Nancy was flying from Calgary back home to Edmonton with a special constable. They'd been doing some covert type work. The weather came down, and north of Calgary, she flew into an unmarked guy wire, and they were both killed. And this segues into where I'm going with this. Several years ago, the RCMP troop mates, we were, the three ladies and myself, we were her troop mates, and we had a troop reunion in Regina, and we invited Nancy's mother and father to join us. We planted a commemorative tree. We laid the wreath, as you can see, and just a tribute to our troop mate and colleague. Handsome looking fellow at the back, the red surge at least fit then, it doesn't now. So in 2007, I was the officer in charge of the Air Services branch. And notice the change in name. We used to have the Marine Division. We used to have the Air Division. We've long since lost the Marine Division and/or branch, and now Air Services is a branch. So 2007, the RCMP Air Services was 70 years old. I was the officer in charge. So we hosted an open house. There were a number of the Canadian Aviation Society Ottawa chapter members attended. We had 4 or 5 business aircraft that were invited to attend. And we laid a wreath and again a commemorative tree. And the lady here is Mrs. Nicholson. And her husband was Tim, who was killed in the crash of the Cessna in 2000. Air Services branch, or emergency response team were doing an exercise. They were dropped off overnight, and the pilot, Ed Mobley, and Special Constable Tim Nelson decided that they would go home. And as they were taking off, the wheels came off and they were both killed. So Mrs. Nicholson happened to be in Ottawa at the time, and she was able to lay the wreath for us. A very special, moving occasion. Now, one of the best parts of this exercise is that most of you are probably aware of the Vintage Wings of Canada collection across the river from Ottawa in Gatineau, owned by Mike Potter. Mike Potter had a Spitfire. Well, actually, he had 2 for a while. Now he's back down to 1. But in 2007, I wrote to him. I said, I can't do anything for you money-wise. I can offer you tea and coffee when you get here and a nice little commemorative plaque. But is there any chance you could do a fly past? So part of the ceremony, we had members on horseback, we had the piper, we had the chaplain, we were doing all this bits and pieces. We had the minute of silence, and as the piper's last note played, Tim Allen, who at that time was the chief test pilot for the National Research Council in the neighboring hangar to us, had pre-positioned himself on the ground. He gave the call to Mike Potter, and Mike Potter did a low-level fly past right over the top of the Air Services hangar, rest assured with permission of the appropriate authorities, and then he broke up and right. And as you all know, you don't hear a Merlin till it's right on top of you, and when you do, your heart pounds and the tears come. It was just a very special commemorative moment. Mike Potter landed the aircraft afterwards. This particular shot is not there, but he did park out in front of the hangar. It was a very, very successful and moving event. But it wasn't just to commemorate the Air Division and Air Services members that had passed away in service over the years, but I incorporated a bit of a tribute to there were about 130-ish RCMP members at the start of World War II who left the force to join the Air Force, Royal Air Force, mostly Royal Canadian Air Force. And there were about 30 of them that were killed in subsequent accidents and operations. So I wanted to mark their passing as well. It's a bit of a sidebar project. I call it RCMP Red to Air Force Blue. Somehow or other, we got the force to pay for this nice little backdrop, which of course is somewhat dated now. But again, it was a very successful day. Most part, the weather cooperated. So that was the link to my troop mate, Nancy Putkemery. So this is Commissioner McBrien. Commissioner McBrien was a stalwart force in getting the RCMP equipped, as it turns out, with Dragonflies. You can see this particular one, CF AAA. Certainly see where the wings have been highlighted. But again, he was a moving force in getting us our our fleet together. I'm just going to back up for a split second because it's an important little note here. Back to Nancy Put-Kemry. The rules for putting members' names on the honor roll are very strict. And at the time in 1989 and in the 3 or 4 ensuing years, there was a great discussion. While they were Nancy and the special consul, they were just flying home, so it didn't really count as being at work. I was one of the ones, and 2 or 3 of my troop mates, certainly a number of Air Services branch people said, this is not right. They should be on the RCMP honor roll. You know, they lost their lives serving Canadians, et cetera, et cetera. So Bev Bussin happened to be at this commemorative ceremony we had in 2007. And at one point she said, I'd like a few words with you by yourself, Chief Superintendent Henderson. And I'm thinking, oh, you know, whose cornflakes have I contaminated today? In any event, she said, I've got some good news for you. I am going to announce today during their comments that they've revisited the decision and Nancy Put-Kemry and Nicholson's names are going to be added to the RCMP honor roll. And what did I think of that? And I said, if the commissioner would let me hug her, she'd find out. And she said, go ahead. And I did. So from a troopmate's perspective, that was indeed great news. So moving on to the next slide. So this is the delivery day for the 4 Dragonflies, MPC, MPB, MPA. And you'll all understand and appreciate that most of our aircraft are registered MP mounted police. Lots of registration changes over the year, but that's pretty much been one of the constants. When I did this spiel to Toronto back in 2006-ish, Fred Hodson was there and he came up to me and he said, I'm in that photograph. Now, I'm hoping some of you know that name, Fred Hodson, you know, another one of the stalwart founding members, a writer and an AME. Sadly, in my ignorance, I didn't make a note of which one he is, but he is one of the fellows in the white coveralls. So very quickly after we got a hold of these Dragonflies, they were deployed to New Brunswick, mostly Moncton and that neck of the woods. Tremendous amount of smuggling going on, a lot of booze coming ashore. So we wanted all kinds of, as much air activity as we could to try and curtail the smuggling. Prior to obtaining our own aircraft, we were, working with contracts with the Air Force of the time. And ultimately they said, we can't keep doing this. We've got our own mandate. You guys go get your own airplanes, which happened to jive with what McBrien wanted to do. So here's Mike Papa Charlie. I believe it to be taken in Moncton. I don't have the names of the players. Just a quick note, I've got probably about 200 different aircraft photographs of this era, up to and including the Beavers and Expeditors. Sadly, some of them come with captions and many, many don't. So one of the initial aircrew members for the first 8 or 9 members that joined Air Services Division was a fellow by the name of Dubach. And he is in this photograph. This is from his collection, and I sadly don't know which one it is. You can see Inspector Cox in the middle with his wings and the officer's uniform. And if I've got my numbers right, there's 3 other pilots there. I don't know what the chap on the extreme left is doing, maybe customs or some such. And then the fellows without wings, I'm going to presume are AMEs or engineers, whatever their title may have been at the time. So, and yes, I'm going to jump around. This is not going to be a strictly chronological thing. I'm just trying to cram as much different bits and pieces of Air Services Division as I can. This is Mike Papa Foxtrot. It was Mike Papa Foxtrot, the RCMP Norseman. When we sold it on, it went to Ignace Airways on Highway 17, I guess, east of Dryden. And as you can see, it went to a rather severe fire. I talked to some of the people in the area 25, 30 years ago, and they said some of the bits and pieces were just shoved into the lake. It's a big lake, so I have no idea where. But one of the interesting things about this particular piece is that, again, back Paddy Gardner and Bruce Gowan were apparently on a Trans-Canada airplane spotting trip. And they salvaged this piece from that wreck that they photographed. And Patty gave it to me several years ago, again, when he was clearing house. At the time, it was burnt and charcoaly and just plain ugly. And in my wisdom, if that's a term I'm searching for, I took it into the AME shop, the overall hangar here in Ottawa Air Services, and said, can you clean this up for me? And this is what I got back. With hindsight, I should have left it just the way it was, but there we are, piece of an old RCMP airplane. Mike Papa Echo, again, Norseman. This one is from the Northwest Territories Archives. No caption, that's it. This is Mike Papa Lima. I don't know where it was taken, but I do know that Constable and Mrs. Ballantyne are being transferred from wherever this is taken. I'd be guessing Yellowknife, only because everyone's really well dressed. The rock over to the left, I'd be just guessing. And they were being transferred to Fort Providence, Northwest Territories. This is in 1956. I'm guessing it's the pilot with his back to us. It could be, who knows? I'm hoping not, with the spurs on. But you can see all the other members and all the ladies, you know, dressed to the nines to wish Constable and Mrs. Ballantyne well on their pending transfer. Just, you know, sets the era all those years ago. Now this is MPL, again the Norseman. This was taken at the infield at the Edmonton Municipal Airport. And the story goes here that this is Staff Sergeant Harry Heacock is the pilot, and Special Constable John Farrell, perhaps an engineer, I'm not really sure. One of my contacts spoke with Harry about this photograph, and he said it was late spring. It was a hot, bloody day, and the photographer really wanted to have these RCMP members standing by an airplane with their hides and furs on. So they did it. And Harry commented afterwards that by the time they got back, they were very hummy. So although it ostensibly might be way up north in the tundra, some such place, it was taken in Edmonton in the late spring. So just a quick note here. This is from the, I'm going to quote a paragraph here, from the annual historical report of the Royal Canadian Army Signal Station at Reliance, Northwest Territories. Now, remembering when we had the Norsemen, there were just 2 or 3 of them, and that was it. So it was a big deal. So just a little reference to MPL. On July 3rd, RCMP aircraft MPL brought Constable George Soper and Constable Don Compton here as replacements for Corporal Rolstone and Constable Wigren. Also on board the aircraft are 2 members of the RCMP Marine Section. Corporal Rolston turned over the command of the local RCMP detachment to Constable Soper. RCMP aircraft MPL departed July 4th, taking Corporal Rolston and Constable Wigren to Fort Smith. And there's further down, there's another reference with the MPL was back in Reliance. So here we have the delivery of our first beaver. This is Mike Papa November. It says so on the caption that came with it, came attached to it. I believe this is taken at Downsview, although I'm not positive about that. If you see the RCMP member with the Stetson on, that is, hang on here, lost my place again. That is Corporal Rothwell, and this is taken in 1952. Corporal Rothwell features in a couple of the future aircraft, and he was later killed in the crash of a beaver, which I'm going to reference later on. But he flew the beavers, the expediters. He was one of those larger-than-life types. So here we go. This is the RCMP have occupied a number of different facilities in Ottawa. This is an unknown otter, obviously undergoing some major degree of maintenance or overhaul. We have about maybe a year or so ago, I shared this photograph with retired Air Service branch members and some RCMP historians, and a fellow by the name of Jack Van Norman, former RCMP pilot, and Dennis Witcher, another RCMP pilot. They came back and said, it's a fellow by the name of Charlie Ross is on the top. Notice that he's wearing his tie. and Marsh-Ney is center, holding up the wing. So this is taken at the old RCMP hangar at the west end of Rockcliffe Airport. The building is still extant, but it's used for the musical ride now for storage and other bits and pieces. In later years, and I'll have a photograph of another aircraft, we occupied shared the Ministry of Transport hangar, Transport Canada hangar, for 8 or 9 years before we moved into the new hangar, which is in Ottawa, I say new, 25 years ago, beside the National Research Council. So obviously, if you have tail draggers, you need to give your pilots some tail dragging experience. This is Cornell CFMPK. I'd like to think that's the Stinson, which I'm going to reference in due course on the little snippet on the left-hand side. Pretty sure this one's taken at Rockcliffe. And Larry Milbury kindly shared this image with me, or gave me the print. Very generous. So here we are. This is our first Beach 18, Mike Papa Hotel. In my humble opinion, a great shot of MPH, nice and shiny. So this is Inspector Dw Dawson. He was a Royal Canadian Air Force veteran. If you have a look at Hugh Halliday's Honors and Awards site, Dawson was awarded the Air Force Cross, and he was the officer in charge of the RCMP Air Division for a number of years. It's an unknown beach. I have no idea which one it is, and it's in the Ministry of Transport hangar, which I've got the dates here. We shared with Transport 1966 through to 1994. And again, that's at the Ottawa International Airport. So it's getting a fair bit of attention from what I can see there. CFMPI, which I was going to report this evening, was held at the Air Museum in Nanton. Well, when I did the talk this morning to the Montreal chapter, one of the fellows there told me that Nanton has decided that MPI doesn't fit their remit, so it's moved on. We do not know where. Perhaps someone listening does, but it's one of the survivors, as is CFMPH, which I'm going to speak about a little later. If anyone happens to know where that photograph is taken, I'd love to know. I'm not sure if someone suggested perhaps Saskatoon, I don't know. This is the delivery flight of MPH and MPI from Kansas. And again, there's no information as to where it is, but 2 brand new airplanes on their way back to Canada. A classic photograph. Again, this would be at Rockcliffe. I have no doubt, the beach has been rolled out, the photographer's there, and they've approached the musical ride about getting one of their members out. They've got the musical ride pennant. The member that's sitting on the horse has got at least 15 years service, 5 years per star on his left shoulder. Again, another shot of MPH, a great shot. Just as a quick aside, I have a piece of the inside of that airplane. There's a plastic, the inside of the door is cloth covered or leather covered. And there was a small piece of plastic about 10 by 14 or 15, which went over the door latch so that the latch could be moved and your hands would just be touching the plastic, not wearing out the leather. So another little memento. So here this happens to be a shot that's out and about there, but we have Beach D18 MPI on the left. We have our famous Grumman Goose, Mike Papa Golf in the middle, and we have Beach MPH on the extreme right. And all 3 of these aircraft survive. I've just touched on MPI. It's apparently leaving or has left Nanton. The Goose is at the Air Museum here in Ottawa. And a quick little aside there, most of you are probably aware that when the Goose was retiring, the federal government was going to sell it. There was a tremendous hue and cry from the citizenry, and presumably a lot of aviation fans have said, no, this is an iconic aircraft. It's got to go to the Air Museum. And yes, the Air Museum has it. It's in the storage hangar. You can only see it on those special days when they allow access to the storage facility. And of course, MPH is on display in your fair city. Speaking of which, so this is the other end of Regina. I'm talking to people from Regina and giving them a geography lesson. So the main entrance to Regina, to the RCMP depot, is over on Dewdney. This is the back way in, or it was the back way in when I was there. So this would have been, you'll remember now that it's on display in front of the RCMP chapel. So this is a little series of photographs where they're mounting it at the back end of the chapel. So here's the brick building behind was torn down quite a few years ago, and that occupies the site of where the RCMP museum used to be before it moved on into the new Reception Foundation Center. Now, these particular series of photographs in the old Air Museum, I accessed this must be 20 some years ago. Some early member of Air Services Division kept two large scrapbooks, each about 2 or 3 inches thick, full of photographs and clippings of Air Services history and people. Sadly, they wouldn't let me take it away to copy it, but I was able to take photographs of the photographs, and that's what that little series is. And I'll just pop back for a second. And according to Google Earth, and I'm sure there's members there that could confirm it, it's still in front and to the right of the chapel by the parade square. So here we are with the Grumman Goose. The fellow on chap is ultimately became Chief Superintendent James Howard Reed. His nickname was Wing Reed, not Wings, but Wing. And he ultimately got in charge of the RCMP Air Services Division. This is taken in a Klavic. Again, he was a World War II pilot, served from 1941 through to 1946. His son was a pilot with Air Services branch when I was out there in 2006, 2007. This one's taken in a Klavic. And again, this one's from the NWT archives. So here we have, we've moved on to an Otter, that wonderful dark blue and yellow color scheme, which I happen to think is one of the best we've ever had. Not a whole lot of details about this. Manitoba Archives, can't remember if it was Manitoba Archives, but more likely NWT Archives. No names, no captions. This is from the Bernie Filiatro collection. Sadly, we don't know which aircraft it is, but it's clearly taken someplace where there's a fair bit of snow. The airplane's been parked up for a while. It's got the skis going. So we've moved on now to our turbo beavers, Mike Papa Alpha. Again, I don't know which city this is. If there's anyone out there that has any ideas, probably some people clamoring, I know. So this is the current RCMP hangar here in Ottawa. This is Twin Otter Mike Papa Juliet. It was based in Happy Valley Goose Bay. And you can just see the tail end of the Piaggio G Fox on your left-hand side, more of which later on. Now, this one was stationed in Happy Valley Goose Bay, as was I in 1994 through 1997. And this particular day, we get this message that MPJ has to be flown down to Ottawa. It's going to spend a week in the maintenance overhaul shop. There were a bunch of empty seats on it, and scouts honored. There was room for myself, my wife, and our 2 children. It was an incredible flight, gloriously sunny day. Basically flew straight south from Happy Valley Goose Bay, hit the St. Lawrence, turned right, followed the St. Lawrence along till it came to the Ottawa River and ended up in Ottawa. It was a magical, magical flight. We were there for a week. I stayed with my mom and dad, and then we ended up going back to Happy Valley Goose Bay. This is the shot of MPJ again. This one, I can't remember if we were on our way to Voisey's Bay, which was a large iron ore nickel deposit mine in northern Labrador, enormous mine. And I can't remember if we were coming or going, sad to say. It's not my photograph, but it's a nice shot of MPJ. This is our one foray into jet aircraft. This is the, hang on here, where is it? Ah, there we are. This is the West Wind, Israeli Aircraft Industries, Mike Papa Foxtrot. I don't know very much about this aircraft at all. I have not met anyone that any of the pilots that flew it. I know there was a big hue and cry that at the time, we don't need a jet, we don't need a jet. And you'll certainly appreciate we haven't had any since. So this is Air One. This was a pretty momentous purchase for the RCMP. This is taken out near Vancouver, British Columbia. Classic photograph. Sadly, it doesn't really show up as well as I would like, but it was one of those forays into helicopters which allowed us to do, chasing high-speed chases with less risk, robberies in progress, all those major type of crimes. And it was, as I said, it was a great asset. You can see the forward-looking infrared camera on the bottom left of underneath the pilot's seat. A great acquisition. So this is Auxiliary Constable Melland. He sent me a whole whack of photographs while he was flying or passengering. So you can see the helicopters landed, like Papa Alpha, and obviously they're dealing with a grow up in the mountains somewhere. And I'm presuming it's somewhat cold. In a seizure of this size, they would probably just have taken some samples and burnt what they could. So when at one point the air services in British Columbia decided that it would be nice to have a Beaver. A Beaver is a great aircraft, and I'm not arguing that wasn't a great aircraft. It certainly was. The purchase was pretty much well along before I joined up with air services in 2006. But at some point we have to decide what color should it be. And it's 2007, it's the 70th anniversary. I said, well, that's a no-brainer. We'll go retro. We'll do the yellow and blue. I left the execution of the job to the people in British Columbia. And sadly, as you can see, they went to a much, much lighter blue than would have been historically accurate. I mean, it's still a great color scheme. And most of you are probably aware that this particular airframe didn't last a whole lot of time because that happened to it. And I'm reasonably sure that you can all see that the gear is down. So that's probably what happened. So here we are with the Piaggio CG Fox. This is taken up in Iqaluit. It's got some of the protective detail members, or flew up some of the protective detail members. Prime Minister Martin was making a visit to Iqaluit. In my humble opinion, an entirely inappropriate fit for the RCMP. Some of our pilots didn't like flying it. Some of them weren't comfortable flying it, but they would fly it. It just never really caught on. And it was a maintenance nightmare. To get to a piece, you'd have to move 20 things because the Italians just crammed it all in there. And I was, as you can see, I'm sort of bad-mouthing this aircraft. It's long since gone from our fleet, which is a good thing. And sadly, I can't remember the fellow's name, but there was one of the fellows that was watching this presentation this morning out of Montreal actually owned one of these things for, I think he said 18 years, and he has since sold it. And he agreed that it was a maintenance nightmare, cost a fortune, et cetera, et cetera. He used to fly it for test pilot type work. But he was at pains to say, as I've just said, that it was not a fit for the RCMP fleet. We simply shouldn't have had it. So then, obviously, we made a switch to the PC-12. And about 1995, or in there somewhere or other, I'm stationed in Happy Valley, Goose Bay. My EA comes in and said, there's some guy at the front counter, I think it was Bob Kellner. He wants to talk to you. And you'll all know that name as the fellow that brought the Pilatus into North America, Pilatus aircraft into North America. So away we go out to the airport, and I'm moving along over this aircraft, and he says, "You've got to buy these for the RCMP." I'm thinking, yeah, okay, lowly inspector. This is somewhat above my pay grade. And of course, as you all certainly know, through the years, we probably had about, pick a number, 25, 30 of these things go through the fleet. This one's taken up in Arctic Bay. Now, increasingly, earlier on, reference was made that there was a marked Pilatus in this color scheme that was landing in Regina. But as a rule, more generally now, they're done in the more civilian type colors. If they're in an operational division, like up north, it'd certainly be the RCMP colors. If they're flying in and out of Danzoo, spending all their time in Toronto and Montreal and that neck of the woods, perhaps in non-contract leasing, they're more likely to have this type of color scheme. This was taken at Uplands. You can see the Transport Canada hangar in the background with the trusses up above. So this is a photograph taken in Greece Fjord. I'm not sure if any of you know any of the RCMP pilots. The Inuit fellow standing by the door is a fellow by the name of Colin Gunn. He's been flying for, it's got to be 30 plus years. He's one of those fellows that has been with the RCMP for many, many years. He flew with Boric. He's done rescue missions down in Antarctica. A very, very skilled pilot. My wife is on the extreme left. I made a lot of brownie points when we were up there, most of which I've used up in the meantime, by getting Barbara into every single one of the 26 communities in Nunavut. We would land and the members would say, "What about your wife?" And I said, "Just tell us what time you want us back out of the airport. She'll be there." Because she could go and have a cup of tea with someone or go visiting. It was just excellent. So I referenced the Stinson earlier on. Here it is on floats. And again, this is in the RCMP hangar at Rockcliffe. So presumably it's landed or it's going to go take off from the Ottawa River. Now, again, this is one of the survivors. Now, setting aside the former RCMP beavers that are out there and the otters and the twin otters, it's remarkable that we've got the Goose, we've got two beaches, and we've got this Stinson MPJ, which is now held by the Reynolds Collection in Wetaskiwin. A fellow by the name of Don Clancer, a former RCMP pilot and a major RCMP historian, tracked down the basic frame of this aircraft. I'm going to guess probably 15, 20 years or so ago, acquired another airframe for parts and had it restored and then presented it, he and his wife presented it as a donation to the collection in Wetaskiwin. So we have yet another survivor. I understand as well that the same collection has the tail feathers from Dragonfly Mike Papa Alpha, and I have no clue as to how they would have acquired that. So we've got, survivors from our first 4 or 5 different types of aircraft. Now, just a quick, this is a note I got from Don Clancher. When I purchased the wreckage in Calgary, all I got was the bare damaged fuselage from when it crashed north of Calgary. No doors, nothing from the firewall forward. No interior, no windows or windshield. I purchased another aircraft in Langley, BC, which the owner no longer wanted, using it for parts. I oversaw and paid for the restoration work undertaken up to the time it was donated to the Reynolds Museum. I've talked to different aviation folk of late, and I don't think it's on permanent display, but I do understand that they have tours of behind the doors sort of thing, and it is accessible. So this is an advertisement from the RCMP quarterly magazine. I have 95% of the magazines dating back to 1938, 39. And this is an advert in the magazine. De Havilland, of course, had the same sort of thing, and Grumman with the Goose. And just so you know, I'm sort of drawing to a close here. So just, I referenced earlier on the members of the RCMP that had left the force in the early days of World War II. This is a fellow by the name of Lambert. who left the RCMP, joined the Royal Air Force, and was killed on active service. I've got binders full of details of these incredible people. This is a photograph that one of my, Ian MacDonald is a member of the Canadian Aviation Historical Society here in Ottawa, and he put me onto this photograph on eBay, which I was the successful bidder. And of course, what do we see? It's an RCMP pilot. He's got his wings, he's got some ribbons, and that's about all we know. So again, I threw it out to the aviation community, Historical Society, retired pilots, and the like, and ultimately learned there were some members that were able to identify him as Benjamin John Rule. He was a regimental number 14766, which means he joined after World War II. He was a pilot during the 1939-45 war. Served the RCAF from August 11th, 1941 through to October 3rd, 1945, finishing as a flight instructor. When he left the force, he flew for Transport Canada, working as an airways inspector. This is another photograph that popped up on eBay, and it's got an interesting little caption here. With a little bit of research and Ancestry.com, I was able to go through and surface some newspaper articles. The dove was over here on a sales presentation, so it was all over North America. And obviously these RCMP members are being wined and dined that you should buy a dove, which at the time would have far exceeded any need we would have for such a large aircraft. But the caption, I'm just going to read how it's written. Here are 3 members of the famous Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The Mounties too use airplanes very often when chasing outlaws. Left to right are Sergeant Dw Dawson, Staff Inspector C.B. MacDonnell, who later on became a judge, and Inspector Philip Cox, the Chief of the Flying Mounties. The 2 with wings on their tunics are pilots in addition to being policemen. And again, I would reference that if you wanted to be a pilot, sometimes they would train you up, or if you were a direct entry from having flown before. So I'm just going to reference Jack Van Norman here again. He's a retired RCMP pilot. He's like most of the folk that I'm talking to. He's a collector of all things aviation. And for those that are like me that are married and your wife is saying, you've got to start getting rid of this stuff. Jack was under a fair bit of pressure here a couple of months ago, and he shared with me logbooks that belong to this chap, Arnold Noel Beaumont. Now he flew for the British Columbia Air Service. He was a World War II pilot. When the British Columbia Provincial Police were absorbed by the RCMP, their beaver came with that deal. And it was FHW, which I'm going to reference here in a moment or two. But just before we go there, this is February 1955. And in February 1955, there was a B-47 lost in northern Saskatchewan near Big Sandy Lake. And I dare say everyone I'm speaking to is aware of that loss. But you can see here in Beaumont's logbook, B-47 jet flew up 80 north of the PA, or some such thing. 2 survivors flown to the PA. Now this is in an otter. I should reference here very quickly that I've got his 2nd and 3rd volumes in my collection now, courtesy of Jack Van Norman, but I don't have his World War II logbook, as the family elected to keep those. So this is the next page. And you'll see the captain of the B-47 was a Captain Dowdy. Remains of Captain Dowdy, 4 members of the crew flown to the PA. So that wouldn't have been one of the Beaumont's best days. Now, just as well in this collection came 3 volumes of the aircraft logs, the books that record all the maintenance, the engine changes, the oil change, the skis, the modifications. So I've got the first 4 of those, which, I mean, to talk about a lot of research opportunities, it's a great thing if I can ever get myself to sit down and do it. But that was for FHW, which I referenced earlier on, which had been owned by the British Columbia Provincial Police. And on August 6, 1958, Staff Sergeant Rothwell, and you'll remember that name from when we first got a hold of the Beaver back in 52, if memory serves. They were looking for a murderer. The fellow had killed a young lady, and they were flying a search pattern. And the RCMP aircraft was caught in a downdraft below the crest of a mountain at too low an altitude to avoid hitting the terrain. It crashed and burned over Skaha Lake, south of Penticton, BC, while searching for a wanted murderer, killing 3 members of the force: Staff Sergeant Stanley Rothwell, Constable Richard William Green, and Special Constable Joseph Edouard Cormier. And now presumably volume 5, as they were supposed to be, held with the aircraft, would have been destroyed in the fire. So those of you that are still with me, that is the end of my little presentation. I hope you found it of interest, and I'm hoping it met your expectations.